first half an hour from grade 12 to 21st of July 2020 start.
Yes, what? What? My mic's on mute. Okay, right, moving on. I was being rude about people, so it's fine, don't worry, you didn't miss anything.
At least it's not recorded.
Okay, where's Sash? Okay, right, going.
Going. Yeah, I think
Okay, is it okay if I record? Record. Okay, going.
Mom, I haven't touched the disc yet, so may I sit here and eat?
What's the difference?
Say it again.
he hasn't touched the desk yet, so he wants to eat.
Yeah, I'll sit away.
I'll
just face the other way.
You can eat here. You can eat in that desk. I don't care. That's too short. Okay, moving on. Shh. Focus. So remember, guys. Steve, what was the last transitional fossil we discussed?
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, so you happy? You understand what a transitional fossil is, and you understand the importance of finding transitional fossils. Okay, so the second one that I'm going to do, and then I'm going to leave it at just 2. I'm not going to do any more examples. This one is Archaeopteryx. It was the first.
I told you that I'm going to welcome. I did.
You mumbled into your mask.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ma'am, is this not the transitional line? Or is this like the 9?
Is it?
Is this the transitional species that we're doing now?
Yes. So we did Tiktaalik last time, and this one is the second one we're doing Archaeopteryx. Okay. So Archaeopteryx. This is the first record of a bird. So remember that birds evolved from reptiles. And you can remember that because you remember in the cladogram that we had earlier, the cladogram went blah, 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 and mammals was up the top here, and then there was a branch here that had reptiles, and a branch off of the reptiles that had birds. Okay, so that means that birds evolved from reptiles. Okay. And so this particular fossil, this is a very, very, very famous one. Guys, what's with the fiddling? Now, I know that the moment I go like this, you're going to start again. Okay, all right. So this particular image of the fossil is absolutely famous. Okay, I'm sure you're very familiar with it. Yeah. First found in Germany in 1861. It is believed by absolute dating to be between 150 to 145 million years old. And it's got all sorts of features that are very interestingly features of reptiles, but features of birds. And that's why it's such a critically important transitional fossil. So if you look at it, what you can see on it is flight feathers. Can you see the outline of the wing there? That's Steve, somebody clap him. Okay, and there's an outline of a wing, and here is an outline of feathers on a tail. Now it's a much longer tail than birds normally have. You know when you eat chickens, roast chicken for lunch, and you get the Pope's nose?
Yeah.
Thank you. There's one child. Hey, mask, nose. The Pope's nose, it's just that little piece with about 3 or 4 coccygeal vertebrae. Tiny. It's not this whole long tail as most reptiles have. Okay, so why does it matter, this fossil that has been found? And it's the earliest known flying bird. So here's just a picture of it relative to a pigeon and a big dinosaur. Okay, so you can, well, it's actually not a very big dinosaur. You can tell the size, and you can also tell similarities and differences. So if you look at the pigeon, its tail is minute in terms of the bone structure. I'm not talking about feathers, I'm talking bones. Whereas here, so in this one, the bones only go that far. Here, the bones go all the way there into the actual tail. Okay, it was discovered within 2 years of the publication of On the Origin of Species, which, remember, is Darwin's famous book. And remember that one of the big arguments people used against the theory of evolution being a truthful thing is they said, if you're saying this kind of organism evolved into this kind of organism, where's the evidence of in between? Which is basically what you were asking me the other day about the legs. You said, how did it just go from fins to legs? There's evidence of all these transitional fossils, and remember that Darwin said they will be found. Believe me, at some stage of the game, somebody's going to find these transitional fossils, and that's why these are so important.
No, question. I forgot what the scientific term for the missing leg was.
Transitional fossil? Okay. Alright. And why is this particular one important? Because it shares features with both meat-eating dinosaurs and birds. Now, please don't go and learn this. Okay, it's really not critical that you know it. But the wrist, the snout, the tail, and the pelvis are all typical of meat-eating dinosaurs, whereas feathers, and you do know that feathers are not a symmetrical structure. So if you have a look at the structure of a feather, there's that little thing that goes up the middle that people used to make pens out of, and the vein of the feather is asymmetrical. It's always bigger on one side than it is on the other side, and that's got to do with the actual aerodynamics and flying, and very, very long feathered wings. So that's what Archaeopteryx has got. Okay, right. So moving on from transitional fossils, I'm only doing the 2 examples. If they ask you a different one in the matric exam, just apply what you know, apply what you should know, and put it in there. Okay, all right. You happy with that? So, in terms of the theory of evolution, obviously Charles Darwin is one of the famous oaks, and he wrote this really important book, and I'm going to talk more about him later on. He wrote On the Origin of Species. Okay, if you look at historically the theories of evolution, this was Charles Darwin's grandfather. His name is Erasmus Darwin. Please don't learn the years, but have a vague idea when this all happened. So he lived from 1731 to 1802. He was a doctor, he was a poet, he wrote a book called Zoonomia, and he published it in 1794. And he suggested in that book that all the different forms of life had evolved from a common ancestor. Didn't suggest how, didn't say anything about it, just said it. And his views greatly influenced those of his grandson, Charles Darwin. Okay, this is critically important that you know this one. Okay, so Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, 1744 to 1829. So he spoke about one species evolving into another species. However, his mechanism of how he proposed that happened is where the flaw lies. So let me go first of all and explain this, then I'll go back to that one. So his theory is the law of use and disuse. Okay? He felt that here were little short-necked giraffes, and he believed The short-necked giraffes were in competition with all the other kinds of animals for the leaves that were in the reach of this little short-necked giraffes. And so these little giraffes stretched their necks, stretch, and they got higher and higher up within the tree, and eventually their necks were really long. And the baby giraffe that they gave birth to also had long necks. Okay, so that was Lamarck's theory, that evolution was driven by an inner need. Now, I'm a prime example of the fact that that cannot be true. I've spent half my life stretching for things. The bottom shelf of my kitchen cupboard, the top shelf of Pick and Pay, which is like, I don't know who can reach that top shelf of Pick and Pay. I am no taller than I ever was. Okay? So, Okay. So he believed that the mechanism was through the process of developing new structures and organs to meet an organism's changing needs. So his idea was the law of use and misuse of organs. But his idea actually influenced Darwin's thinking. So let's have a look. If environmental conditions change, and it could be as simple as there are lots of other of animals competing for the same resources, could be that simple. Okay, the needs of the organisms change to cope with the environment. Organism makes more frequent use of certain body parts. I mean, that would mean Joshua's brain is just quite big. The body parts become enlarged or modified, and this is important. These newly acquired characteristics can be passed on to the offspring. Now, these are not genetic. This would be like a person going to the gym and working out a hell of a lot and developing groot muscles and then popping out a baby with groot muscles. It's just not going to happen. Or a person going to the hairdresser and having their hair bleached blonde and then popping out a blonde baby when in reality their hair is dark. Yeah.
Ma'am, you said Jean-Baptiste influenced Darwin. Which Darwin was it? Erasmus?
Charles, yeah. Okay, all right. So there's a little table of comparison, and remember I've said to you that in the last year's matric exam, paper 2, they asked a table of comparison. The kids did absolutely appallingly. Be warned. However, there are a lot of things wrong with this particular table. For example, there are 3 things on this side, 4 things on that side. That means that it's not being compared across. You must, if you say number of petals in a monocotyledonous flower, you'd say 3s or multiples of 3. In the dicotyledonous, you'd have to say 4 or 5 or multiples of 5. You've got to compare the same features across. And that's where kids messed up last year. Okay. In addition, Lamarck arranged. So you've got to be very careful how you express this. Students very often say, this organism adapted to the environment. And that's very Lamarck. The organism adapted to the environment. The organism structure can suit the environment. The structure can be adapted to the environment. But that's not just that, some organism dived into the sea off the land and it went, oh, I want to be a whale, let me get some flippers. It just doesn't work like that. Okay, so be careful how you express that. He arranged all animals in a straight line from the most simple to the most complex. And so if you compare it with that phylogenetic tree that's over there that you all looked at the other day, that none of you are looking at now, then you'll see it's not in a straight line. Okay, it's very, very branching. Okay, so he accepted that life forms evolve or change from simple to more complex. But the biggest thing is the mechanism that he proposed. This guy is really important. Alfred Wallace, 1823 to 1913. This guy was a naturalist. He studied plants and animals in Indonesia, which you know is off towards the east. And he had similar ideas to Darwin. Now there's a lovely story about this whole thing. Okay, so don't write this. This is just a story, but it helps you to understand the context. That's why I'm going to tell it to you. So Darwin went off on his voyage on the Beagle, and he went all over the show, and he went to the Galapagos Islands, and he came back. Now, Darwin was married to a woman who was extremely religious. You do know it was his cousin, hey? But I'll show you some interesting statistics about the whole married cousin thing. Okay, anyway. She was exceptionally, she was a devout Christian. And they had a whole lot of children. I think there were 10 of them. And Darwin's favourite daughter, parents never had favourites, Darwin's favourite daughter died young. And his wife believed that one day the whole family would be in heaven and they would be together as a family again. So when Darwin came back to England after his long voyage, and he was speaking to people about his theory of evolution, his wife said to him, no, probably in worse terms than that. You can't do that because you can't believe that organisms evolve from existing organisms, because the Bible says God created all living organisms. And you're going against the Bible, you're going against God. You're not going to end up in heaven. And therefore, when we all get to heaven, our family's not going to be complete because you're not going to be there with us. So for a long time, Darwin actually was very quiet about his ideas. He spoke to people in the know, scientists who had similar kinds of ideas. So he did do a lot of speaking, but he didn't publish. And remember that publishing is the ultimate in the scientific world. You publish an article or you publish a book, an article in a journal or a book, you've won the race. Okay. So Darwin wasn't really doing any publishing about this. He was just talking on the quiet to people. And then somebody came along and said to him, you know what? There's this guy Wallace in Indonesia who has the same beliefs as you. Evolution occurred, and it occurred by natural selection. And Darwin got a bit of a fright, because then he thought, oh my word, I am being quiet, this guy's going to publish before me, he's going to get all the accolades. And so he and Wallace spoke to each other, wrote letters, because it was long ago, and they decided to publish a joint journal article. Paper means an article in a scientific journal. Okay, yep.
What's an accolade?
Like the prize, an achievement. So a colours blazer is an accolade.
Okay.
The Oscar, that funny thingy, is an accolade. It's just like something of a recognition of somebody's achievements. Okay, right. And in the scientific world, it's a hell of a thing. Because if one does get accolades, then you get funding for research. And there's a lot of competition between scientists to get the very limited funding for research. So somebody like Lee Berger, who found Australopithecus sediba, he's just got so much fun and he doesn't know what to do with it now.
I know this is not really relevant, but it's bugging me. Have they recolored that photograph? Or is it just black?
Now I'm sure they've recolored. Oh,
because
there were cameras around there.
yes, but not color.
You're right. Oh, they probably have. It might even not be a photo, it might be a painting. So if you look at all the pictures of Erasmus Darwin, when I googled the other day to find pictures of that, some of them were paintings and then now other people have done from an existing painting. Okay, right, blah, 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 blah. Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882. There's a picture of him when he was young. He struggled in school, he completed a degree in theology, he actually wanted to study medicine, or his family told him he had to study medicine, but he fainted at the sight of blood, so it didn't really go down that well. He spent a lot of time studying natural science. Okay? And then in 1831, he sailed on the HMS Beagle as the naturalist and the ship's doctor, and don't giggle at this, the captain's companion. Okay.
What do you mean by companion?
No, just, no, just sit at the supper table, have a chat to the captain. I mean, who's he going to talk to otherwise? He's going to be lonely. Okay. Anyway, for interest's sake, and just because this applies to what you did on reproduction, he married his first cousin, with whom he had 10 children. And three of them died as infants. 3 of them who survived to adulthood were infertile. How interesting is that? So inbreeding. And he was the first to raise the question if incest may cause weakness in offspring, because he studied inbred plants in his garden and he started worrying about it. But he absolutely adored his wife.
So this is the wife that said no. This is the wife that said no, you cannot.
Yes, there was only one wife. Okay, so there's the Beagle. Here's the journey. Okay, so they left Britain. They went down the east coast of South America, up the west coast. This was important because there's steep cliffs up there that have got strata that even from the sea you can see visible fossils. Okay, so that was critical. Then went to the Galapagos Islands. That was critical. Then sailed in this direction, fell off the end of the earth, climbed that side up there, and went blah, 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 blah. Stopped off in South Africa and was scathing about South Africa, the rude bastard. And then went back. I can't remember, just like I said, it's got nothing of interest. Yes, my
He
opinion.
didn't see how famous, man.
Nothing of interest.
South Africa is a pretty cool place.
Did you see the dates, Joshua?
That was just
Okay.
the Bushveld days.
Alright, going. Galapagos Islands. Now, remember, Galapagos Islands are here. We've spoken a lot about the Galapagos Islands. They're on the equator. Okay, we've spoken about the fact that they are volcanic in origin, that they come from a hot spot underneath the sea, and that lava comes to the surface and it solidifies and it forms an island. And I've spoken to you about the fact that the islands are moving at a measurable rate. So there are a whole lot of the islands. The hot spot is over here. The islands are all moving in that direction. Okay. I told you the other day that they're very, very barren. A whole lot of the islands are just like desert, although some of them are really amazing. And he was amazed at any wildlife. So they are almost 1,000 kilometers from the nearest land. So here you've got the coast of South America. Okay, the coast of South America. This is Ecuador. Okay, the Galapagos Islands belong to Ecuador. Okay, and they're about 1,000 kilometers off of Ecuador towards the west, and they're located on the equator. So Darwin was amazed that any wildlife actually reached such a remote place, and he suspected that all the birds, all the plants, all the other animals had arrived during the distant past from South America. Okay, you've got to know this. Okay, and I'll go back and I'll go through it in more detail now. So there are a lot of animals that live on the different islands, that because the different islands have got different climates and different vegetation, although the animals must have obviously come from a common ancestor, they have evolved very differently. And remember, I've told you that that's called divergent evolution. Okay, when from a common ancestor, a lot of different species are formed. And these are the really, really important points. There are lots of them. But these are amazing. So, on some of the islands where there's a very high rainfall, the giant tortoises. Now, the giant tortoises are giant tortoises. They're huge. The giant tortoises, where there's high rainfall and lots of vegetation, the giant tortoises there have got domed shells and quite short front legs and back legs, but quite short legs and quite short necks. Because what they do is they eat all the low-lying grass and the low-lying leaves. Okay. On other islands, which are extremely dry, the tortoises have got a saddle-shaped shell. So if you look here, look at how the shell has a little notch there, which this shell doesn't have. And the legs, especially the forelegs of these giant tortoises, are extremely long, and their neck is very long. And the reason why is because the islands are so incredibly dry, the majority of the vegetation is prickly pear cactuses that are different from South African ones. They're very like a tree, and I'll show you a picture just now. So these guys, please don't call them guys in a test or exam, ate low-lying grass and low-lying leaves. These ones, there was no low-lying grass and low-lying leaves. And so what they have to do is stretch as high as they can to eat the prickly pears off the prickly pear cactus. Okay, that's what those ones do. Hence the neck in the shell, that they can stretch their neck up high, high, high. Yes, Stephen?
Does that then mean that the theory that they evolved because of need is true?
No. So it basically goes, there's variation between all the individuals of a species. You can tell that because you can see that you're a little bit different from all these other ones. Okay? Therefore, in an environment where certain things are needed, like if there was a famine and the only food left in South Africa was on the top shelf at Pick n Pay, William and Michelle would live and I would die. Okay, that would mean that William and Michelle, because they lived for longer than I did, would have more chance to reproduce. They would have more offspring and pass on their tall genes. So somewhere there must have been some tortoises that had this shaped shell and a really long neck and some really long legs. And because it benefited them in this dry environment, they were able to survive for longer than the ones that didn't have those features. And because they lived for longer, they were able to produce more offspring and pass on their genes to a greater percentage in the following generation. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Good.
The tortoises are the creatures that live for like 80 years, right?
These ones live for more than 100.
Crazy like that.
Okay. And then these ones are the iguanas. Okay. Now this one is a land iguana, and this one eats prickly pear cactuses. So you know what prickly pears look like, the fruit. But you know what the cactus looks like. Alright, I'll show you a picture now. So this one eats that. This one is a marine iguana. So it's actually a reptile that lives under the sea. Well, it doesn't live under the sea. Okay, it actually doesn't live under the sea, and I'm so sad I don't have time to show you DVDs. But what it does is it climbs up these really high cliffs on some of the islands, and it jumps off the cliffs into the sea, and it goes right down to the bottom of the sea, and it grazes algae on the rocks. So it's busy grazing here. Now this looks like horrific, but they're actually about this big.
That's still a substantial amount.
No, the land iguanas are much bigger than the marine ones.
Can they breathe underwater?
No, because they're reptiles, and so they have to come to the surface. Okay, so here, hey, Steve and friend, stop it. Okay, so here is, this is the typical prickly pear cactus on the Galapagos Islands. lives on the very dry islands, and it's got a long stem, almost like a tree. And then these things are leaves, and the leaves produce fruit on the on the margin.